In our town, things don't change. Not really. The name on the highway sign says Red Hollow, Montana, but everyone still calls it the Valley, the same way their grandparents did. The valley sits low between black pine ridges where fog collects every morning like spilled milk, slow and quiet. Cattle chew along the fence lines, goats climb anything they can, geese wander through yards like they own the place. Most days, life here runs on habits older than electricity. But this time of year is the worst. Winter never fully arrives. Instead, we get this miserable in-between season where the ground isn't snow and isn't earth. It's a gray slurry of ice chunks, slush, and frozen mud. Every step pulls at your boots like the ground itself wants to keep you. That morning I stood beside my well and stared down into the dark circle. Something had gone wrong. Very wrong. 10 minutes had passed, maybe more, and Mark Dalton still hadn't answered. The rope hung tight in the shaft, pulled straight down like it was hooked on something deep underground. But there was no voice, no banging, no movement. Just silence. The trouble had started the night before. A hard freeze rolled through the valley and locked everything solid. Pipes burst or froze in half the houses. Some folks had water trickling, others had none at all. By morning, everyone started checking their wells. That's when I noticed mine. The bucket hit the bottom way too fast. Clang! A dry, hollow sound. At first, I thought something was stuck down there, so I lowered it again. Same thing. Clang! Stone. Empty. A well that had never gone dry in 50 years was suddenly a hollow pipe into darkness. That's when Mark offered to climb down. Mark was my neighbor, thick-shouldered, stubborn, the kind of guy who'd lived in forests half his life. He strapped on his headlamp and tied knots along the rope so he could brace his boots while climbing. I stayed above to hold the line. At first, he kept talking while he descended, grumbling, joking, cursing under his breath about the cold slime on the wooden walls. His voice echoed up the shaft. Damn boards are slick as hell. Then quieter. Feels deeper than usual. The light from his headlamp shrank until it looked like a small star far below. Then he said something strange. Not loud, not scared, just confused. Hey, Alex, walls collapsed down here. My stomach tightened. What do you mean, collapsed? His voice echoed again, closer to the ground now. There's a gap, like a tunnel or something. Runs sideways, looks like... He stopped. For a moment, I thought he'd dropped the flashlight. Mark? Nothing. Mark! Silence. The rope twitched once. Just a small vibration, like he'd brushed it accidentally. Then it went still. I stood there in light work pants and a thin jacket, freezing so hard my teeth hurt. The wind pushed through the valley, carrying the smell of wet wood and iron. Evening crept in fast. I must have looked ridiculous standing beside my own well like that. My long coat barely kept the wind from crawling up my sleeves. Cold slipped through the collar and down my back. Out here, we don't have phone signal most of the time. Too many hills, too much forest. The nearest town sits 70 miles away, and getting there takes most of a day if the road's clear. My snowmobile had broken down the week before, and hiking 10 miles through frozen slush wasn't exactly an option. Without the well, we had nothing. No water for coffee, no water to wash, no water for the livestock. I stood there longer than I want to admit. Then finally, I turned and went inside. If Mark wasn't answering, there was only one thing left to do. Climb down myself. The snow that day looked wrong. Not white, gray, reddish. The
The new brick factory up in Larkspur City had started running a few months earlier.
They promised filters and modern emissions control. But every few days, dust drifted down into the valley. Sometimes black soot, sometimes red clay powder. That afternoon, it fell with the snow like rust. By the time I finished gearing up, the ground outside looked stained. I changed into insulated pants, thick wool socks, rubber boots, gloves, and a heavier coat. Grabbed spare batteries, my best flashlight, and an old climbing carabiner in case I needed to clip the rope to my belt. I slipped a folding knife into my pocket, too. Not for anything specific, just in case. When I returned to the well, the air smelled damp and metallic, like river mud. The rope still hung there exactly the same. No movement, no mark. And that's when Mrs. Peterson walked by. She lived 2 houses down, an elderly widow who moved slow but noticed everything. She stopped when she saw me standing there. "Oh my," she said gently. "Evening, Alex. What are you doing out here?" I swallowed. Didn't really want to say the words out loud. "The well ran dry," I said finally. "Mark climbed down to check it." She stepped closer and leaned over the wooden rim, gripping the boards carefully. For a moment, she just stared down into the darkness. Her shoulders stiffened. "You should be careful," she murmured. Then she stepped back quickly, adjusting her scarf like something down there had unsettled her. "Well, we filled our buckets yesterday evening," she said. "Weather radio said a storm's coming." I nodded tiredly. The wind was picking up again. Red snowflakes landed on the rim of the well, staining the wood. Mrs. Peterson spat into the slush. "Damn factory dust," she muttered. "Look at that. Whole valley's turning red." I followed her gaze. Across the open field beyond the houses, the fresh snow really did look rust-colored, like someone had sifted powdered clay over everything. For a second, I felt something twist in my chest. Not fear, exactly. Just the feeling that something was wrong. Behind us, the well creaked softly. The rope shifted, just a little, as if something far below had moved. And that's when I decided to climb down. But the moment my boots disappeared into the shaft, something down there breathed. Climbing down sounded like a brave idea when I was standing on the ground. It stopped feeling brave the moment the well swallowed me. The air changed almost immediately. Up top there had been wind, red snow, the dull sounds of the valley. But inside the shaft, everything tightened. The walls were old cedar boards, slick with moisture and patches of thin ice. The smell was heavy, wet wood, rusted metal, and something deeper, something earthy like river silt. My boots pressed against the knotted rope as I lowered myself. One knot, then another. The opening above shrank until the gray sky looked like a coin. I dropped about 6 feet, maybe 8, and then I froze. Because from somewhere below, a sound rolled upward. Not a splash, not water. A low, guttural movement of air, like something deep underground had just inhaled. The vibration moved through the shaft and into my chest. For a second, I forgot to breathe. In my mind, I saw Mark again, his headlamp glowing, his shoulders turning toward something in the darkness beside him. Something large, something that shouldn't be inside a well. My hands tightened around the rope. "Mark!" I called. My voice bounced off the walls and came back thin and hollow. Nothing answered. "Mark, you down there?" Silence. Then again, that same heavy sound, closer this time, like whatever made it had shifted position beneath me. A cold pulse ran down my spine.
Suddenly, the idea of climbing further didn't seem brave anymore. It seemed stupid, really stupid. Before my brain could argue with itself, my arms had already started hauling me upward. The rope burned my gloves as I climbed. One knot, another.
I moved faster and faster, heart pounding like something was chasing me from below. My shoulder scraped the rim of the well. My coat snagged the wood. Then suddenly I was back on the ground, half sprawled beside the opening, breathing like I'd sprinted a mile. For a moment I just lay there, staring at the gray sky. The wind pushed snow across my face. When I finally leaned over the well again and shouted down, "Mark, you hear me?" The shaft answered with nothing but darkness and wind. The storm thickened quickly. Heavy flakes drifted down, not white, but smeared with that same brick-red dust from the factory miles away. The snow stuck to my coat and sleeves like wet clay. I wiped my face and forced myself to think. Standing there alone clearly wasn't helping. If something had happened to Mark, I needed another pair of hands. Someone to hold the rope, someone to confirm I wasn't imagining things. I pulled out my phone and tried calling Steve Carter, the town's handyman. Steve fixed pumps, pipes, generators, basically anything that broke in Red Hollow. Signal bars flickered on the screen, then disappeared, then came back. The call connected for half a second. "Hello? Steve, it's Alex." "What's up?" "My well's dry. Mark climbed down to check and..." He stopped answering. There was a pause, then static. The call died. "Steve, hello?" Nothing. Just the empty signal icon blinking. I cursed quietly and shoved the phone back in my pocket. By now, the wind had picked up hard enough to blur the edges of the valley. The red snow swirled sideways, coating fences and rooftops in a thin, rust-colored film. When I turned back toward the well, someone was standing beside it. I nearly jumped. It was Steve Carter. He had already leaned over the rim and was peering into the shaft. The man moved slow and steady, the way people do when they've spent their lives working with tools instead of rushing around. His old fur-lined hat flapped slightly in the wind. "Evening, Alex," he said without turning. "You got here fast," I muttered. "Was already nearby." He tilted his head, listening into the darkness. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Your neighbor's not down there." I stepped closer. "What do you mean he's not down there?" Steve took the flashlight from my hand and aimed it downward. The beam stretched into the shaft, but didn't catch Mark. Didn't catch anything. Just black depth. "You said he found a tunnel?" Steve asked calmly. "Yeah. Said the wall collapsed." Steve grunted softly. "Well, that explains it." Before I could ask what he meant, he swung one leg over the well's rim. "Wait," I said quickly. "Maybe I should..." He shook his head. "No offense, Alex, but if there's a cave opening down there, you'll panic before you even reach it." Then he grabbed the rope and started descending. Steve moved fast, confident, like someone who had climbed into 100 wells before. Within seconds, his boots disappeared below the rim. The beam of the flashlight slid down the wooden walls until it became a small white circle far beneath. I gripped the rope and leaned closer. "See anything?" I called. His voice echoed upward faintly. "Yeah, the wall's definitely caved in. There's a passage heading sideways." My pulse quickened. "Do you see Mark?" The light shifted. Steve leaned toward the tunnel. "Hard to tell. Looks like..." His voice stopped. "Steve?" No answer. "Steve!" The rope jerked slightly, then went completely still. And just like that, the second man vanished into the well. For a long moment, I simply stared at the rope. 2 men, gone, within minutes. A cold weight settled into my stomach. This wasn't an accident anymore. Something was wrong with that hole in the ground. Very wrong. I ran. Not toward my house this time, but across the village through the rising storm. If 2 men had already disappeared down there, I needed witnesses, and I needed them fast, because the valley was already starting to feel smaller, like the storm and that red snow were slowly sealing us in. And when I burst through the door of Fred Miller's house without knocking, the words that came out of my mouth shocked even me. "People are disappearing in my well." Fred Miller looked up slowly from the kitchen table. He was a big man with thick shoulders and a neck like a tree stump, wearing an old gray sweatshirt stretched thin at the elbows. Across from him sat Sam Parker, the mill truck driver from the flour depot down the road, thinner, younger, but with the same tired eyes people get after too many winters in the valley. The kitchen smelled warm, fried onions, cheap whiskey, wet clothes drying by the wood stove. For a moment, the scene felt so normal that my words sounded ridiculous even to me. Fred squinted. "What did you say?" I stepped inside, snow melting off my boots onto the floor. "My well," I said. 2 people went down there. Mark first, then Steve Carter." Fred leaned back in his chair. "And?" "They're gone." Sam straightened in his seat. Fred snorted and reached for his mug. "Come on, Alex. Nobody just disappears down a well." I slammed my glove on the table harder than I meant to. "They're not answering!" The room went quiet. Fred studied my face for a long moment, trying to decide whether I was drunk, panicked, or telling the truth. Sam spoke first. "You serious?" "Dead serious." Fred's smile faded. He set the mug down slowly. "You mean they climbed down and just vanished?" I nodded. Fred rubbed his jaw, thinking. Outside, the wind slammed snow against the windows in thick bursts. "A look." Sam grabbed his jacket without a look. Sam grabbed his jacket without another word. Within minutes, the 3 of us were back outside in the storm. The wind hit harder now. Snow moved sideways through the village, sticking to fences, roofs, and the branches of the tall pines surrounding Red Hollow. And everything was tinted that same strange color. Rust, clay, blood. The valley looked like someone had dusted it with powdered brick. We walked quickly, leaning into the wind. No one talked much. Fred carried a flashlight. Sam walked behind us with his collar pulled high around his face. When we reached the well, I pointed to the rope. Fred shined the beam downward. The light vanished into the darkness. He listened. For several seconds, none of us spoke. Then Sam leaned forward and looked too. He recoiled almost immediately. "Damn," he muttered. "Feels colder down there than it should." Fred scratched his head. "Well, I'm not climbing down." "What?" I snapped. Fred turned the flashlight toward me. "2 guys disappear and you think I'm gonna volunteer next?" He stepped back. "Not happening." Anger flared in my chest, but it died almost instantly because he was right. None of us wanted to be the next one. That's when a voice spoke behind us. "Y'all shouldn't be standing there so long." We turned. Mrs. Peterson had appeared out of the swirling snow like she'd been carried by the storm itself. Her scarf whipped in the wind as she stepped closer. She looked at the well, then at the rope, then at our faces. "You boys attempting the frost witch," she said quietly. Fred rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go." "What witch?" I asked. Mrs. Peterson crossed herself quickly. The gesture looked automatic, like muscle memory from childhood.
"This well's older than the town," she said. "Long before Red Hollow was built, there was another settlement here. Old religious folk.
Lived separate from everyone. Sam frowned. What does that have to do with anything? They found a witch among them, Mrs. Peterson continued, ignoring him. At least, they thought they did. The wind rattled the wooden well cover. Her voice dropped lower. They dragged the poor woman here, prayed, shouted scripture. Then they threw her down. She pointed into the shaft. Fred snorted again. Sounds like church history. Mrs. Peterson shook her head slowly. But they were wrong. The three of us stayed quiet. They realized it while she was falling, she said softly. She wasn't a witch at all. A gust of wind blew snow across the well's rim. She hit the bottom alive, Mrs. Peterson continued. Broken spine, broken arms, broken legs. Her eyes stayed fixed on the darkness below. They could hear her screaming. Fred's smile disappeared. The men climbed down one by one to rescue her, she said. Her voice turned almost to a whisper. And none of them came back. The storm howled around us. Fred spat into the snow. Ghost stories, he muttered, but he didn't look into the well again. More people began arriving. Word spreads fast in small towns. Within half an hour, half the village had gathered despite the storm. Men, women, kids, everyone whispering and arguing at the edge of the clearing. Some blamed the brick factory. Others blamed the weather. The children started throwing red snowballs, laughing and yelling until their mothers dragged them back. The scene felt wrong. Too loud. Too crowded. The well should have been quiet. Instead, it had become a spectacle. Then someone beside me whispered, "Look." I leaned over the rim again and saw something that made my stomach drop. Water was rising, fast. Not dripping, not trickling. Rising like someone had opened a floodgate beneath the ground. Dark water surged upward inside the shaft. The rope drifted sideways. The wooden walls began to glisten with moisture. The well was filling again. People fell silent, one by one. Even the kids stopped laughing. We all watched as the level climbed higher. 10 feet. 8. 6. The rope slowly disappeared beneath the surface, and suddenly I understood something that made my chest feel hollow. If the water had returned, then the tunnel Mark found would be completely flooded, which meant anyone still down there had no chance left. Beside me, Mayor Nolan Briggs cursed under his breath. "We need emergency services," he said sharply. Phones came out. People lifted them into the air, searching for signal. Nothing. The storm swallowed everything. No reception, no calls, no help. Eventually, people began drifting away. There was nothing left to do. Night was coming. The storm was getting worse. And the well was now full of cold, black water. Somewhere beneath that surface, 2 men had vanished. And there was no way to reach them. Not tonight. Not in this storm. So we did the only thing people ever do when something too big happens in a small town. We went home and pretended mourning might make it make sense. But that night, sitting in Fred's kitchen again with the storm howling outside, we all felt the same thing. Something had opened beneath Red Hollow, and whatever lived down there had already taken its first 2 victims. The emergency crews reached Red Hollow the next morning. For a place like our valley, that alone felt surreal. You don't often hear heavy engines rolling through town that don't belong to a tractor or someone's pickup truck. But that morning, the deep growl of diesel echoed between the pine ridges before we even saw the vehicles. First came the fire department truck, a massive red rig that looked almost absurd parked beside our small wooden houses.
Then an ambulance. Both vehicles crawled through the muddy slush and stopped near the well. The storm had calmed overnight, but the strange red dust hadn't gone anywhere. It coated the snow like a thin, rust-colored film. Roofs, fences, even the branches of the trees were stained with it.
When you breathed, you could taste it, like clay or brick powder. The firefighters didn't waste time talking. They moved like people who had done this many times before. Hoses rolled out across the ground. Pumps roared to life. Within minutes, thick black water began pouring out of the well and into the drainage ditch beside the road. The smell rising from it was sharp and earthy, like underground rivers and rotting leaves. A rescue worker strapped into a harness and climbed over the rim. Helmet, headlamp, breathing gear. He descended slowly, testing each movement with careful precision. The crowd gathered again, though this time people kept their distance. No laughing children, no gossip, just quiet watching. After several minutes, the man's voice came crackling through the radio clipped to his vest. "There's still water pooled at the bottom," he said. "The tunnel's visible. Barely. Not safe to enter yet." He climbed back up. They tried everything they could without sending another person inside. Long steel poles, hooks, cables bent into loops. They pushed and dragged the tools through the water, hoping to catch clothing, a limb, anything that might confirm where the missing men were. But every time the hooks came back up, they carried nothing but mud. The rescue team exchanged glances, professional ones, the kind that don't need words. Eventually, the lead firefighter approached me. He had the face of someone who had seen too many accidents and learned how to speak carefully. "Listen," he said. "If something inside that tunnel injured them, the rising water could have carried the bodies deeper into the cave system." He paused. "We can't safely go in there today." I nodded slowly. There wasn't much else to say. The truth sat heavy in the air between us. If the well connected to underground water tunnels, the current could carry anything miles away, bodies included. The trucks left before sunset. The village returned to silence. But it wasn't the same silence we were used to. This one felt heavier, like something unfinished hung in the air. For weeks afterward, people avoided the well. No one drew water from it. No one even walked close to it unless they had to. The red dust storms came and went. Winter deepened. Life in the valley continued the way it always does, slowly, stubbornly. But two men were still missing, and nobody had answers. Spring finally came. The snow melted into muddy rivers that cut through the fields. Grass pushed through the soil. The air warmed. And by late May, the valley smelled like wet earth and fresh leaves again. Most people had stopped talking about the well by then. It had become one of those things small towns quietly bury under routine. But the well wasn't finished with us. One morning, I lowered the bucket again and heard the same hollow sound. Clang. Dry, empty. The water was gone. Again. This time, no one argued. No one volunteered to climb down. We called emergency services immediately, and to everyone's surprise, they actually came back. The rescue truck arrived around noon. Sunlight poured across the valley that day, warm enough that birds chirped in the trees and insects buzzed along the fence lines. The scene almost felt peaceful, which made what happened next even stranger. The rescuers prepared carefully. Gas detectors, air tanks, climbing ropes. 2 divers descended into the well, wearing breathing masks connected to oxygen tanks. They moved with slow confidence. Nothing like the desperate improvisation Mark and Steve had used months earlier. The crowd gathered again.
Not as large as before, but enough. People whispered. Old women crossed themselves. No one laughed. After several minutes, a voice echoed up from the darkness. "Got something." The words spread through the crowd instantly. Someone gasped. Another person muttered a prayer. The retrieval took time. Careful work. Ropes tightening, metal carabiners clicking.
Muddy water dripping back down the shaft. Eventually, the first body appeared at the rim. Mark. Even after months underground, the cold cave environment had preserved more of him than I expected. The second body followed soon after. Steve Carter. My neighbor. My friend. They laid both bodies on tarps beside the well. The crowd grew quiet. No one wanted to look too closely. But the rescuers weren't finished, because after the bodies came something else. Bones. Old ones, darkened with age. More than a few. More than 10. A tangled collection of human remains that had clearly been resting down there for a very long time. Whispers spread through the crowd immediately. The old stories. The witch. The men who climbed down and never returned. Suddenly, the legend didn't sound like folklore anymore. The rescue team kept working. At one point, they lowered another oxygen tank down to the diver still exploring the tunnel. That's when the lead investigator approached me. He removed his helmet and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Those two men were unlucky," he said. I waited. "When the water level drops," he continued, "carbon dioxide can settle at the bottom of underground caves." He gestured toward the shaft. "It's heavier than air, invisible, odorless." He met my eyes. "A person climbs down, steps into that pocket of gas, and loses consciousness almost instantly." He glanced at the pile of bones. "Looks like that's happened here many times." The explanation made sense. Too much sense. Gas pockets, cave tunnels, accidents repeated over decades. Science. Reality. The Frost Witch story suddenly sounded like nothing more than frightened villagers trying to explain something they didn't understand. Still, as I stood there looking down into the well, I couldn't shake one thought. The rescuers had said the tunnel went deep, very deep, and even they hadn't explored all of it, which meant something else was still down there, far beyond the reach of their lights, waiting in the dark. And that thought didn't leave me, not even months later, because the real horror of that well didn't end with the bodies. It ended with what we never found. By the end of summer, people in Red Hollow stopped talking about the well again. That's how small towns survive things like that. They don't solve them. They bury them under routine until the memory turns dull around the edges. Mark and Steve were buried on the same hill above the church where most of the valley ends up eventually. The funerals were quiet, simple. Pine coffins, a few prayers, dirt falling on wood. After that, life slowly crawled back to normal. The fire department sealed the well for a while, but eventually someone removed the boards and reinforced the walls. Water returned, and people needed it again. The valley had always depended on that well, and habit is stronger than fear. Still, something about it never felt the same. People didn't linger there anymore. No one leaned over the rim for long. You lowered the bucket. You pulled it back up. Then you left. Quick, like the place made your skin itch. Fall came early that year. The brick factory dust still drifted down occasionally, staining the snow and rain with a faint red tint, but nobody mentioned it much anymore. One evening in October, I stopped by Fred's place again. The kitchen looked exactly like it had the night everything started. Same table, same stove, same smell of fried onions and whiskey. Fred poured us each a glass. Sam sat by the window, watching the darkness outside.
For a while, we just talked about normal things. Tractors, hunting season, the price of diesel. Eventually, Sam leaned back in his chair. "You ever think about that cave down there?" he asked. Fred frowned. "Why would I?" Sam shrugged. "They said the tunnel runs deeper than they could explore." Fred waved a hand dismissively. "Gas pocket explains everything. Happens in mines all the time." Sam looked at me. "What about you, Alex?" I hesitated.
Because the truth was, I thought about it more than I wanted to admit. "Sometimes," I said. Fred snorted. "You're overthinking it." Maybe he was right. Maybe the explanation really was that simple. Carbon dioxide, a hidden cave, bad luck. Still, there was one detail that had never quite settled right in my mind. Mark had said something before he disappeared. There's a tunnel, like a passage. And the way his voice had sounded, not frightened, just confused. Winter returned. Another season of slush and red-stained snow rolled through the valley. Life moved on, until late January. That morning, I went out to draw water again. The sky hung low and gray over the trees. Wind pushed through the valley, carrying the smell of snow. I lowered the bucket. The rope slid through my hands. Then, clang. The same hollow sound as before. My stomach dropped. The well was dry again. This time, nobody panicked. We already knew what to do. Emergency services were called immediately. They arrived the next afternoon. Same truck, same equipment, same methodical preparation. The rescue diver who had been there the first time actually recognized me. "Back again, huh?" he said. I forced a smile. "Looks like it." They lowered their instruments first. Gas detectors, cameras, lights. Then the diver climbed down into the well again. The crowd gathered, just like before. But something felt different this time. The air seemed quieter. Even the wind had died down. Everyone watched the rope slowly feeding downward. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Then suddenly the rope jerked. The diver's voice crackled through the radio clipped to the harness above. "Tunnel's wider now," he said. The lead rescuer frowned. "What do you mean wider? Like something collapsed further back." Silence followed. Then the diver spoke again. "Wait." The crowd leaned closer. "What is it?" the rescuer asked. The diver's voice sounded strange now, uneasy. "There are footprints." A ripple moved through the people standing around the well. "Footprints?" the rescuer repeated. "Yeah." A pause. "They're fresh." The wind picked up again across the valley. "Fresh how?" the rescuer asked slowly. The diver took a breath. "They're heading deeper into the cave." Another pause. Then he added something that made the back of my neck prickle. "But none of them lead back out." And that was when the rope suddenly went slack. For half a second, nobody moved. The rope that had been slowly feeding into the well suddenly drooped, sagging in the rescuer's hands like something heavy had vanished from the other end. The lead firefighter grabbed it instinctively. "Hey, you good down there?" Static crackled from the radio. No answer. "Dylan, respond!" The crowd around the well shifted uneasily. Someone behind me whispered a prayer. The rest of us stared into the black opening like it might suddenly spit something back out. The rescuer tried the radio again. "Dylan, confirm status." Nothing. Then, the rope twitched, just once. Every muscle in my body tightened. "Pull him up," someone said. The firefighters immediately started hauling the rope back. Slow, careful. The line slid upward through their gloved hands. 10 feet, 20, 30. Then the diver's helmet appeared over the rim of the well. 2 firefighters grabbed him and helped drag him onto the ground.
His mask came off. His face was pale. Not injured, not unconscious, just shaken. The lead firefighter knelt beside him. What happened? The diver sucked in air like he'd just surfaced from deep water. I didn't lose consciousness, he said quickly. Gas levels were normal. Then why did you stop responding? The diver looked back toward the well. His voice dropped. There's a chamber further in. The firefighter waited. And? The diver hesitated. Something's been moving down there. A few people in the crowd shifted nervously. Animals? Someone asked.
The diver shook his head slowly. No. He rubbed the back of his neck. The footprints I saw, they weren't animal tracks. A cold feeling slid into my chest. What kind were they? The firefighter asked. The diver answered without looking up. Bare feet. No one spoke. The wind rustled through the trees. Bare feet, the firefighter repeated. The diver nodded. Human. Another pause. Small ones, he added, like a child's. The rescuers exchanged uneasy looks. The lead firefighter stood and glanced at the well again. How deep does the tunnel go? Farther than our light reached. And the prince? Heading deeper. Someone in the crowd finally asked the question everyone was thinking. Could someone be living down there? The diver shook his head again. No food sources, no airflow, no way. He hesitated. And the tracks. What about them? They didn't look recent. A chill passed through the group. What do you mean? The firefighter pressed. The diver swallowed. They looked fresh, but the edges were wrong. Wrong how? He exhaled slowly, like they'd been made a long time ago and just reappeared. Nobody liked the sound of that. The lead firefighter looked at the well one more time. Then he made the call. We're sealing it. What? Someone shouted. Until a full geological team investigates this cave system, nobody goes down there again. 2 workers dragged a heavy steel grate from the truck. Within minutes, they had it bolted over the mouth of the well, metal against wood. 4 thick locks. Just like that. The hole was closed. The crowd slowly dispersed. No one argued much. Even Fred seemed relieved. As people walked away, the diver approached me. You live closest to this thing, right? He asked. I nodded. He studied my face for a moment. Keep that grate locked. I will. He hesitated. Because whatever made those footprints. He looked back toward the well one last time. It's still down there. Life in Red Hollow returned to its rhythm again. But something about the valley felt different. The wind seemed quieter. The woods seemed to watch more closely. And sometimes, late at night, when the air went completely still, you could hear something faint echoing across the frozen ground. A distant scraping sound, like bare feet walking slowly across stone. For a while, the steel grate over the well did its job. People stayed away from it. No one tried to open it. No one leaned over it. When someone needed water, they drove to the neighboring valley instead. It was inconvenient, sure, but after what had happened, no one in Red Hollow was eager to pull another bucket from that hole. Winter passed slowly. Spring crept in. Life kept going. Cattle calved, fields thawed. The brick factory dust still drifted down now and then, painting the snow and rain with that same rusty tint. But the well stayed sealed, silent beneath its steel cage. The rescue teams never came back. A geological survey was supposedly scheduled, but like most things promised to small towns, it got lost somewhere between paperwork and budget cuts. Eventually, people stopped talking about the cave, stopped talking about the footprints, stopped talking about Mark and Steve.
The valley had its answer, after all. Gas, a hidden cavern, a tragic accident. That explanation was easier to live with. Then late May arrived. Warm sun, green grass, birds in the pine trees. The kind of morning that makes a place like Red Hollow feel peaceful again. I was fixing a section of fence behind my house when I heard something metallic echo across the yard. Clang. The sound carried clean through the warm air. I froze. For a second, I told myself it could be anything. A loose gate, a shovel falling. But deep down, I already knew. I walked slowly toward the well. The steel grate still covered it. The locks were still in place. But the sound had definitely come from below. Clang. Just like a bucket hitting the bottom. Except no bucket had been there for months.
My stomach tightened. I stepped closer and crouched beside the grate. The opening beneath the bars was dark. Too dark. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind stirred through the trees. Somewhere in the valley, a crow cawed. Then, something moved in the darkness below. Not fast, just a slight shift, like a shadow adjusting its position. My chest tightened. "Hello?" I called down. My voice echoed into the shaft. The darkness swallowed it. Then came the sound. Soft, scraping, stone against skin. Slow footsteps moving somewhere far beneath the earth. I leaned closer to the grate. "Is someone down there?" Silence. Then something else happened. The red dust that sometimes drifted down from the factory had settled lightly over the metal bars. A thin powder coating the surface. And right in front of me, the dust shifted. Not from wind, from pressure. A shape appeared in it. The clear outline of a small human foot. Bare, standing on the steel grate. My blood turned cold. I stared at it, unable to move, because the footprint hadn't appeared from above. It had pressed outward from below, as if something underneath the well had stepped up against the metal. Another faint scraping sound echoed up the shaft. Then a second footprint appeared beside the first. Small, bare, child-sized. I stumbled backward. The metal grate rattled faintly, and from somewhere deep below the earth, a slow breath drifted upward through the bars. The valley was silent. The wind had stopped. Even the birds were quiet. And for the first time since that day months ago, I understood something the rescuers hadn't. The cave hadn't taken those people. Something inside it had. And whatever it was still there. Still walking. Still waiting beneath Red Hollow. Waiting for the day someone decides to unlock the grate. Because wells don't stay sealed forever. And sooner or later, someone always looks down.